Welcome to another episode of SJS Recommends. In this episode, we are gonna discuss Andrei Tarkovsky's Nostalghia from 1983. Yeah, it's his second to last film. It came out after one of his masterpieces, Stalker, and before his last film, The Sacrifice. So the film is basically about a poet, a Russian poet, who goes to Italy with a guide to research an 18th century composer. But there he meets this guy called Domenico, who has like pretty severe mental illness and a very dark past. And I think that's enough about the plot, as the film isn't very plot heavy. I think our discussion is gonna focus on aesthetics and themes, and maybe not much on like individual scenes or in like the plot moments, but more of the broad themes and aesthetic. And this type of film that even just after watching it, it's hard to remember all the plot points, as you mostly focus on again looking at the beautiful shots and the mood and atmosphere and the feeling of the film rather than pointless plot details. And this was my second time watching this film, and I feel like this might be Andrei Tarkovsky's maybe most complex work, along with Mirror. Or I mean, Mirror isn't necessarily maybe the most complex, nor maybe it's this one, but maybe they are the ones that are the most hard to talk about. But you could say that something like Stalker is more dense and maybe more thematically rich, but these are films that are where it's really hard to look under the surface and find out what they are about. So I'm pretty intimidated to talk about this film. It might be the most difficult film so far on the podcast, although it won't be for long, as we are going to talk about Kichu Yoshida's Heroic Purgatory very soon, so that's going to be even more difficult. So this is good practice, and I think it's good to kind of really start our slow cinema journey with Tarkovsky, as we will do many slow cinema directors. Like in the next episode, we're going to talk about Ceylan's Usak, and then we are, of course, going to talk about directors like Belatar and Chiming Liang in the future as well. But anyway, now I will ask Altaz his general thoughts about the film. Then after that, we are going to do kind of a spoiler-free discussion, although this isn't the film where you have to worry about the spoilers, and then we are going to go through the aesthetics and themes. But so what did you think about the film?
Yeah, I love the film. Really incredible film, and like you shared, obviously this film is not about like plot as much as it's an immersive experience, but like very dense as well, and like you said, it's going to be challenging to talk about, because it's like you watch it and then you're like transported and you go on this journey, and then you kind of come out of it and then you're not quite sure exactly what that journey entailed exactly, but you knew that it just moved you internally in so many different ways, from scene to scene, whether it was like just sheer awe, or it was sometimes kinds of sadness, a certain emotions would come up, and you're like, it just helped you see that how impactful cinema can be through just kind of displaying the images, and with the music and creating the atmosphere. But I don't know who said this or where so I can't attribute it, but it was saying that, of course, cinema being the visual medium, it is more important what you're doing with the medium as opposed to just the storytelling aspect. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to discuss when we get into the thematic things.
Yeah, to give a bit more context, I think this is often slightly underrated in his filmography, although overall it's a very acclaimed film. And if you look at Letterboxd, for example, I think it has like 4.3, which is insanely high
Wow. Yeah.
rating. But overall, like critics usually focus on Stalker, Solaris, Mirror, and Andrei Rublev, and then the other three films often get left out of the conversation for different reasons. I think Ivan's Childhood is kind of the accessible film, so that's why that gets left out of the conversation. But I think I'm not sure why Nostalghia is one film that why people don't talk about it as much, because it definitely deserves to be talked about, as it is another masterpiece of Tarkovsky's and such a dense and complex film that people should talk about it even more. But
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and then what was I also gonna say? Oh yeah, that again this film was shot in Italy, of course, and it kind of came after, or it's kind of like autobiographical in the way that again Tarkovsky had to leave the Soviet Union as well, and it's kind of how he dealt with his new life overseas. And so the film is a lot about Tarkovsky's life, and it's again like the name suggests, it's about nostalgia. But when we get to the themes, we can talk about the name of the film more as
Mhm.
well. But I wouldn't start with this film if you haven't seen any Tarkovsky films. Maybe start with one of the more famous ones and leave this one a bit later when you've watched maybe 2 or 3 Tarkovskys at least. And I think for many people this is probably the last Tarkovsky film they watch, or the second to last. But obviously
Mhm.
for you it's kind of in your kind of the mid period of your Tarkovsky journey, as
Yeah.
as you have seen like 3 films before this. But
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you there that it's wouldn't be if you start with this, and I'm of course, the very bold might do that, or it just happens, it's there, and you're watching it. So I don't think it's entirely impossible that you watch this as a first one, just fall in love with the experience, and then want to journey more, because I could see that. I mean, that's kind of what you've done in your journey, but um, in that way, it's also more difficult because you're not familiar with at least some of his work to understand some of the things Tarkovsky's interested in, or how it's the journey has led him to that. So when you were saying this thing about people focus on like Tarkovsky's earlier films, um, I do notice that as well. That there's this early film bias in majority of all the auteurs that are recognized their filmography, because it's almost like they did these great things, and then there's only kind of decay from that. Like they can't rise to their early heights. But I think that's a can be a misplaced position as well, because later films have the benefit with the great auteurs that they're reflecting back on their previous selves, their previous thoughts, expanding on themes that they were started exploring in their journey. So seeing this film really made me see that why late stage films can be so worthwhile as well, and that need to be focused on. It's just like even when we talked about Rivette, and when I watched Joan the Maid, a late kind of work from Rivette, it matters. So there should be this correction. It shouldn't always be skewed towards early works, because later works are important as well.
yeah, one thing that could be mentioned here is that, of course, if Tarkovsky hadn't died so
Yeah,
young, this probably wouldn't have been his late
yeah,
work,
yeah.
because
Of
he could
course,
easily
it's
still be alive if he just didn't get cancer from working on Stalker, because there was like it was a toxic place where they shot Stalker, so I think he got cancer from that. So it's obviously very sad that he died. I think he was in his late 40s or early 50s or something. So he could very well still be alive, and he could have made many more films. But this film also, even though he wasn't that old in the end when he made it, but it kind of feels like an artist looking at his past and
Yeah.
going back, and it kind of feels like an old man making it, even though he wasn't that old in the end.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's like, you're right. It's unfortunately his untimely passing makes this a late stage. But yeah, if he had continued on, this might have been kind of that period that I can honestly connect with, because at being like 45 years of age, I do reflect a lot on, it almost feels like a whole life has been led, even though I'm not at the, you know, hopefully at the end of my life, or anywhere close to that, but it can feel like that. So you get that sense in this film through and through. So when you are saying, um, talking about who it might be for, so people who are interested in, are undergoing that kind of reflection, or are interested in such like reflective pieces, because another film that also came to mind, that's a later film of a great director who's re-looking at their previous thoughts, is Il General de Rovere, um, the Rossellini film. So those kinds of films are really interesting. I really enjoyed that, when they're kind of reflecting back on their previous selves and previous works, and so it can be really be for those people who like that sort of thing.
So now we could kind of talk about that again, what type of people would enjoy this film again before we get into more spoiler type of discussion. So I think it would be preferable that you have like some background with art house films, or quite a lot of background, preferably that you have seen like quite a number of films from like famous authors. But I think Tarkovsky in general is pretty good entry point into slow cinema, but I wouldn't say he's a good entry point to art house cinema in general. Although for me, I watched Solaris very early on my cinephile journey, so I had just kind of started getting into more serious films, and I liked Solaris on my first watch. But I think for many people it might not be like that you instantly connect with him if you start with him, if you
Mhm.
start your art house journey with him. So, and I think it would be good to maybe watch things like 2001: A Space Odyssey as well, which is kind of like slow cinema, but in a way more accessible. And then maybe watch maybe some Bergman and things like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe some Bresson, as Tarkovsky was a huge Bresson fan. And like we said earlier, also maybe not, don't start with this one, your Tarkovsky journey, but start with one of the more famous films.
oh yeah. I fully agree with that. I think, yeah, that can help have a basis to see, to even more better appreciate what Tarkovsky's trying to do. So I don't even know if I'll be able to articulate what you can kind of sense he's doing with this film. But for that, yeah, the basis helps. Otherwise, you kind of go in there and maybe you will connect with you, but yeah, to get something a little more out of it, probably, or just to build you up to it. Yeah, I wouldn't. Again, yeah, I wouldn't say this is good for like a very early in your kind of cinephile journey film. Um, and obviously, by cinephile, we're always referring to going a little bit beyond the mainstream. So that's kind of, because if it's just mainstream and then you watch something like this, I don't know. It would be an interesting experiment to have someone do that and see what they thought. But but I don't know. It's yeah, if that would work for that person.
And one more thing I would say about this is that if you are the type of person who needs a very clear plot that goes from point A to point B in a linear way, you shouldn't watch this. Or if you only like films that are very plot heavy, but you don't like films that are more abstract and more about the aesthetic and theme, yeah, this is not a film for people like that. And I know many people are like that. Most people are like that, but I personally often prefer this type of cinema to the plot heavy cinema.
Mhm.
Again, as a lover of painting and other art forms, I like this type of kind of, you could say, stream of consciousness, poetic
Mhm.
cinema, because that's why I also love music. and things like that that are kind of full expression of stream of consciousness and the more abstract side of human brain.
100% agree. Yeah, and this is like one of those films that, which I guess we'll get into more detail later, but like you said, with the plot and all that, there's a huge digression. It's like the premise that you start with the premise, and then there's this huge digression, and then you're kind of going. So it's like it's almost like if you're not just immersed and just going with whatever, you could feel like, oh, all of a sudden it's just gone left, and now it's following a separate thread. Um, when that thread actually falls within the the themes as a whole, but it's just you don't see it if you're just thinking in terms of plotting and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could now end the spoiler-free discussion. Although again, I'm gonna say that with a film like this, the spoilers don't really matter. And again, we are gonna talk about aesthetics and themes and not really the plot as much because again, the plot is kind of whatever. And like I said in the beginning, this is a type of film where you forget kind of individual scenes and things like that very quickly, other than again the aesthetic and things like that. But anyway, I think we could talk about the aesthetics first and then go into the difficult themes. So I think the aesthetics are a bit more easier to describe than the themes. So the
For you.
first thing, yeah, but the first thing to mention about the aesthetic is that we have scenes that are on full color, then we have scenes that are in black and white, and then we have the sepia tone scenes like Stalker. And we also have, again, dream sequences, and the color changes for the dream sequences sometimes, and it's kind of all a bit vague that what is what. And then we, of course, have these long takes, very methodical camera work, lots of beautiful still shots. And it's interesting, even some of the full color scenes look like almost that they are black and white in the way that there are like these white walls and things that you kind of look at particular part of the shot, and even though it's in color, it looks like black and white because of the color contrast. That was one of the things that I noticed towards the end when they are in these, I think, ruins or something, and again they have these huge white walls and then there are these green leaves and stuff, but it all looks like almost black and white. So yeah.
Yeah. It's such an interesting film because it's so difficult in a way. You can start talking about the aesthetic as you were talking. I was like running it back what you're describing, and then I was like, you start talking about the aesthetic, and it's so easy to go into mood, to go into theme, because they're all connected. Like the aesthetic is so interwoven with everything, and again, it's like this immersive experience. But absolutely, so like in aesthetic, first of all, just what the locations they've chosen. So this is, I guess, somewhere it's like kind of an old uh historic, like hamlet in like in like the Tuscany region, and they're just drop dead stunning locations that made me wonder, in this time of CGI, it just put me in awe that these places are real. I was like, clearly this is not constructed, this is real. But I can't believe it that like such places exist, so that awe that gets created by the aesthetic right away. Like, like you said, you start black and white, you are in a valley, there's this mist, there's this someone singing this kind of Russian folk song that is so like almost has an eerie haunting quality, that touching quality. And then and then you move to shots where you think black and white is still continuing, and then you realize, oh, your eyes are deceiving you, this is actually now color. And then makes you wonder, was the previous thing actually black and white, or was that a deception? um and again, you're talking about these things, and right away I can see the connections with the themes, because of what the film is about, which we'll get into later. But yes, you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, the aesthetics, the colors, the tones, the palette, even the lighting, the way you're using chiaroscuro, how you're using lights and shadows, and then how you're changing the lighting during the course of the scene and the shadows. I mean, it's an absolutely stunning visual feast. Just it's worth it just for that alone, just to watch. Like you said, so if you like paintings, as you said, if you're like paintings, you like art, it's just a piece of art just visually before you even get into everything else that's going on in the film.
And I think one thing that also adds to the aesthetic are the actors and how they are put in the frames, and
Yeah.
also the type of facial expressions that they make, because they look like people in paintings.
Mm,
And this is again one of those obviously films that you can just pause at any moment and it will give you a perfect shot that you could put on your wall. It's one of those art gallery films, but obviously that's something that all of Tarkovsky's films are, and this is what he's known for, making these extremely beautiful, very methodical films. And of course there's lots of this what we call like poetic cinema, visual poetry, that you
mhm.
can also like analyze the aesthetics in terms of the themes and the relationship of the aesthetic and theme, like you also alluded to a little bit.
Yeah.
And this was
You-
could be one, like if you watch this film with a friend, you could like constantly pause it and
yeah, yeah,
pick apart like every scene, that how do you interpret this scene and that scene. But it's really hard to do that kind of after you've watched the film, and so that's why the discussion has to be more kind of broader and abstract afterwards. But lots of these types of films would actually be great to discuss kind of in the moment, like 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 a minute after the film has ended. Yeah, kind of
yeah.
like
It's
you would
like,
do in an art gallery when you went to with a friend, yeah, where you
oh
can
yeah,
discuss the paintings on time. So it would be kind of like that.
yeah, and it's like you're absolutely right, and it's like, and then there, in a way, there's so many paintings in that whole film because there are just these moments where you just want to pause and it takes your breath away. And obviously, the filmmaker and the team with the cinematographer, they know that. So hence, I think that's why we like slow cinema so much. Is the creators themselves recognize you need a moment. You know, you don't need to go from this to this and this. You just need that moment. Like, and like you said, it's the expressions on the actors' faces, but also like, yes, the blocking, like where they're positioned in relation to one another. So sometimes you're just staring and the camera is just sitting there, and then maybe there's this space between them. And it's just, yeah, you're drawn to that space between them. And it's not that you're specifically thinking, well, this means that or that means that. But at first you're just like, why am I so like just attracted by this, or why is this just absolutely feel so sublime, or it's just taking my breath away. And that's why I felt constantly like that it was just taking my breath away. Just what's going on the screen, like the composition, the everything, the choices. It's just I mean, it's unbelievable when you see something like this.
And this is maybe one of the bleakest and kind of most eerie
Yeah,
Tarkovsky films, because um, you see these like really again haunting shots, and then the Domenico character who has those mental
yeah,
illness, like he's pretty creepy, and he's obviously played by Erland Josephson, famous from many Ingmar Bergman films. And he was also actually in the Tarkovsky's last film, The Sacrifice, that was shot in Sweden. So that's interesting as well. But of course, Tarkovsky's other films like Stalker and Solaris have those moments of eeriness and darkness as well. But I think this is maybe the film that has most of that, especially as the film kind of progresses a little bit. And again, when we get the Domenico character and he becomes like a pretty big focus on the film, then it becomes darker and eerier.
yeah. It's haunting, and it's like anyone who's troubled by a memory, anyone who's troubled by longing, uh, anyone who's troubled by nostalgia in the English uh, sense of the word. Obviously, the Russian sense is slightly different. Uh, but yeah, it's very much, and it's interesting that you said, "Oh yes, before this, maybe you want to see some Bergman and stuff like that." Because I was watching this and I was like, "Okay, there's wild strawberries in here," but it's going. It's one of the kind of explorations that in and out of memory, images, and longing, and what's going on in your life, and you don't know where the line gets crossed. Another that's a theme in Wild Strawberries, as he's reflecting back on his life. Um, but here, that's why I was like the black and white with the color. It's like that because there's always this question: do you dream in black and white or do you dream in color? And no one really knows per se. They can't pin it down, and that's like that. So what's a dream? What's a reality? So in my longing, or in my desires, or in my idealization, what's real and what's false, and it's not. And existence is this combination of the two going on exactly at the same time in parallel worlds. And while it's at the same time, it's a haunting exploration. Oh my God. Like, phenomenal.
Yeah, I think now we could move on from the aesthetics to the one of the big themes of the film that we get very early on the film. It's the kind of about the nature of art and how it's kind of you cannot translate art and kind of the untranslatability of art. Obviously, they talk about the main character and his guide talk about art quite early on, and can they say that, or the guy says that art cannot be translated, and poetry at least cannot be translated. But then I think the woman says that music can be translated and be more universal. So that's a very interesting conversation in this field. And of course, if we think about like country to country to culture, and from time period to time period, art is obviously very specific to a specific culture, a specific time. It captures time and space. So obviously it can be hard to translate that from a time period to another or from a culture to another. But of course, there is also this more universal side to art that where again I can connect to art from Russia or Japan, and I can connect to art that was made thousands of years before me, but I can never completely understand the context or the specific time and places. I never was there, so there's always this kind of distance between the person who consumes the art and the art itself.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Wow. Um, there's so much there because it's like that. You're right. Like it's like that conversation is starting right away. Right as soon as the film opens, you get an image. You get a choice in terms of color, location, and what's going on. You're in this valley. There are people speckled across. There's this folk song, Russian folk song you hear being sung. There's this mist. There's this. So there's art, and then but that's art without language. So it takes some time before we get to the first dialogue. And I believe, yeah, they get out of the car. They pull up to this church. There's this winding path we also see going to the church. And then it's like they get out of their car, and then I believe his guide says something to him in Russian, and he's like, "No, speak in Italian." And from that moment, now we have this self consciousness, which I feel like also what you're saying mirrors the self consciousness of Tarkovsky himself. I'm now making a film in Italian, so can I translate my Russian kind of comprehension or expression that I have logged in my brain in Russian in an Italian, and it still be the same thing? Can I really communicate that? Because in a way, he is sort of translating, right? Because he's like Russian speaker, and he's kind of translating this into an Italian expression. Does it translate? And like you said, it's absolute. You're obviously I 100% agree and spot on like what you're saying, that now there is this lingering question that whether it's art and audience and all that, um, is it, when language is involved, does it become cultural specific or is it universal? Um, and that kind of just always continue lingers there throughout the whole film. I don't think at any point they're saying it's one way or another, but there's this lingering question. Does it translate? Do we all feel that? Do we all connect with this in the same way? Are we all even looking at the same thing when we're looking at it? So yeah, really important exploration in the film for sure.
And I think I was just thinking that the aesthetic kind of adds to this conversation as well, as you can divide the shots of the film into two categories. There are those distant shots, and then there are the close shots. Like, for example, when they talk about art, we are very close to the characters. They are straight in front of us. But then many of the shots are from very far away, where we really explore the environment and stuff. So there's this, some of them are very distant, some of them are very close. So that's kind of how we can also see art in a way that sometimes it's very close to us, maybe if it's made in our culture or our time period, and then it can be very distant if it was made elsewhere and in a different time and space. And of course, that aesthetic also adds to the other themes of the film, how obviously there's your past and there's the current, there's the nostalgia that you have for your past and your memory. Like, for example, Tarkovsky had for Russia, the Soviet Union, when he had to get an exile from there and move elsewhere. So there is this kind of contrast between two very different things. Yeah, distance and kind of the here and now, and then again your past and current day, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, so I also felt like there's like a Dante's Inferno type thing going on as well, because this guide, I was questioning what this guide, um, Eugenia, like, what does she represent? Because in some ways, is she a muse, like kind of representing of a muse, like something that's inspiring his art, or is she kind of a guide, like Virgil was in Inferno, or is she like Beatrice in the Inferno, where she's this ideal love? Because there's this one point where he goes into the ideal love type thing where he talks about an ideal love is the one that's like not really consummated. So there's like this desire, there's this love, there's this almost um, kind of idealization, but it's never actually reached. And that's the ultimate love. And obviously, as you pointed out, everything is like multi or more faceted. Because in one way, there's that human like love, like relationship element of exploration that's going on at the same time as nationhood and your homeland and your country, and both of them are running parallel in this exploration. So he's kind of, there's all this imagery of descent, right? Because even when you see the valley, there it's pulling like a descent, like he has to go, like in Inferno, you have to go down before you go up. And there are so many images, like the under the church that's underwater, and he's sitting there with Domenico and having this dialogue, questioning things, going back and forth, and it's almost like he's in the depths. He's down in the depths of his soul, in the basement of his soul. He's digging now. He's digging. He's trying to understand. He's trying to reflect. But what's interesting contrast is, while Inferno is like fire and hell and heat, here there's lots of water, and we could go on and on about maybe what the water represents, because if when we saw The Return as well, we were talking about all this presence of so much water. A filmmaker who was inspired by Tarkovsky, so no doubt you could see the connections of using so much water imagery in the film, which is natural to the place he was visiting, but it's purposely chosen for that reason as well, I believe.
I think she, the guide, is kind of like a counterpoint to the main character's self-indulgence.
Uh-huh.
Like she's the kind of like a she's his connection to the real world, so that he isn't like completely just obsessed about the memory and nostalgia, but she is kind of her or his like gate to the real world, and again the challenge to his own kind of preconceptions and ideas. I think because we see them again debate about these various things like about the art, and she often seems to disagree with him, and but then also later on the film she seems to be maybe a little distant from him, and then they kind of start growing apart, and then I think the film gets even again more complex, and we see more and more of these dream sequences and stuff. So it starts becoming more and more about the main character and his mind, but at the beginning he is still kind of more in touch with the real world and with other people.
So you raised this very interesting point. She's definitely, I can see that she's this connection to the world, and at the same time, if you remember at one point he says when they're in the beginning, we're still like half the thing we're talking about is just like at the very beginning. Like we're talking about the first like not even 10 minutes, and there's already so much going on. Where he sends her to the church, but he doesn't want to go, and he's like, "I'm tired of your beauty," and that is that muse-like thing. Now, yeah, it's like either she represents the real world in its real form, and even almost like Mother Earth, and I'm tired of your beauty because your beauty keeps inspiring me in a way or is trying to pull me away from certain things. So that totally matches, I feel like what you're saying. And that's such a like great point that he's in himself in his nostalgia and self-indulgence, and then there's these things like art, the world, or beauty, that this concern of beauty that maybe she represents or she's pulling towards, uh, that's pulling him out of that. And there's this wonderful back and forth too where she also says, you're the one who wanted to come here, but now you're sending me by myself to go into that church. And basically she didn't understand why he's the one requesting that, in a way searching for that, but then also then when he has the opportunity he's turning away from it.
And I started thinking about the nature of art again as well, how again art is kind of our inner world and how we create art through our brains and our thinking, but then at the same time nature itself and all the exterior, all that is outside of ourselves is in a way art as well, like Tarkovsky
Yes.
shows in these like beautiful shots, how again the water, the trees and everything, it's just all art. So art is kind of both the exterior and also the interior, and also the dreams themselves are almost like abstract art as well. So we create art ourselves, but art also exists even outside humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you're in this place that's a combination of two things: natural kind of phenomenon, so the hot springs and the baths that people are in and all that stuff, but then man-made constructions, so creating that infrastructure so you can create that bath that probably existed from the time of the Romans, and the combination of the two, and then a kind of height of a civilization or a particular expression of utopia that's now descended, it's in decay, or it's lost, and it's kind of almost reclaimed by nature and environment, right, through the water, the flooding, and all that. But it's like both sad, the loss, but it's also beautiful because you're like, no one could have thought this up, that no one could have in advance created a situation where you would have this like abandoned church, with history that's now flooded, and the combination of seeing that lovely architecture and the waters taking it over, absolutely magnificent, and none of it's constructed, it's actually being captured. And yeah, it's like connect to what you're saying, that the beauty of nature in itself is a form of art on its own that exists for itself, not necessarily or maybe it exists for us to actually appreciate, because at the end of the day, that's kind of how the ecosystem works. The flower is attractive, so the bee goes there. So yeah, profound.
And I was also started thinking how, again, the idea of past, current day, and future, what that tells about the nature of art as well, because of course our dreams, our mind is informed by the past, the trauma, again, the good things, where we were
Yeah,
born, where we lived. So again, art is kind of created through our past experiences, but at the same time with art, we are always looking at future, and we are trying to create something new or trying to mold something that was already there into something new. But in the end, as it is informed our past about it is informed by our past experiences, then art itself is kind of also the past, even though we are supposed to look at the future as well. So
yeah, oh my god. And then yeah, yeah, I mean, oh my god, like really, like it's just when you're watching this film, you're just in awe with the mind and the minds that collaborated to create this, because that sense of reflection, I think, like for both of us, is what we seek, like something that, you know, explores questions that we we feel in ourselves, but then explores those questions in such a complex and um, way that it almost gives you some sort of solace with the questions, while not really answering anything per se. Um, yeah, yeah, and so art is definitely one theme. Another is a very common theme. I feel, even though I've only seen now 4 Tarkovsky films, but I feel like it's always there lingering. Faith, the nature of faith, and what is faith? Not necessarily religion, but faith, and then I guess the other side of, or something connected to that, spirituality, and then obviously organized religion is in there as well. So when you were talking about like the past, looking to the past and then trying to look to the future, and very much this world is haunting, because it seems that for at least Andrei Gorchakov, the main character Andrei, which is Andrei Tarkovsky, main character is Andrei, but um, he's seeing a world in decay. He's seeing a world like falling apart. It's like there seems to be a lack of hope there, and then this whole dialogue starts evolving as well about faith, and you need something to kind of believe in, even though if it might even potentially be imaginary. Otherwise, there's no hope for any progress or being able to come out of the situation you're currently in. So that's like one aspect of faith being explored. There are others as well.
and I think in Tarkovsky films, both in the films themselves, but also the effect that they have on their viewers, there is always this faith in beauty and faith in
Yeah,
art, and it always makes you believe that the world is kind of beautiful when you watch a Tarkovsky film. But at the same time, of course, there's this idea how the main character is kind of trying to find his way in a way, just like you do when you think about fate. You try to realize the kind of full extent of your soul. And also there's this idea of, I think, empathy in this film, because we see him kind of living through other people and kind of their experiences as well, and how they are all so interconnected. So there's this kind of faith in humanity and others as well, and faith in yourself and your journey. But it's
yeah,
all also at the same time very much diluted by, again, the title of the film, again, nostalgia and memory, because you never
yeah,
can escape that, and it will always affect your brain both negatively and positively, that you have these memories that have shaped you.
Yeah, very much so. It's like he's at an impasse, and we're all there many times in our life where you're questioning how to go forward from here. Like, not just, it could be a nation, because obviously everything that was going on in the Soviet Union at that time, 1983, he's actually outside of the Soviet Union. So part of it ties to the impasse that the Soviet Union is now in, but also a personal impasse. Like, how do you go forward in life? And then a part of that process of trying to figure out how to go forward in life involves going back and saying, where have I already been? And then it almost feels deceivingly like completeness. You go to the past and you come to the present and you say, okay, that's it then. That deceivingly, that was the journey. I was there, da da da. We got to here, and now there's nothing more after this. But of course there is. You have to reinvent. You have to renew. So I don't know if water, all that water is because water is always a source, can be a source of purification, renewal. Obviously, always tied to baptism. Obviously, religious themes are always there in Tarkovsky. Um, so that thing of renewal, that thing of you go forward, and what are the elements that help humanity or an individual go forward? Well, belief in something, faith. You must believe in something, and what is the thing you're supposed to believe in? So one thing is definitely there, art. Art. Art is maybe sometimes, does art have something to believe in? Um, Maybe even the human spirit, even like things like forgiveness, because this is where now you get the interesting left, where he's originally come there to research this made up 18th century Russian composer who lived in Italy and then went back to Russia and committed suicide. But in the process of researching him, he's kind of starts searching with him himself, and as he starts searching in himself, there's this chance meeting or discovery of this individual, Domenico, who apparently imprisoned his family for 7 years, thinking the world is going to end. Believing in that biblical world is going to end. I got to protect my family. The last judgment days are coming, and I'm going to basically sit here and imprison them wrongly. And now the children have been let out, and now there's that whole regret of that, and the whole action of seeking forgiveness or looking for forgiveness. That haunting feeling of how that faith has actually misled you.
Yeah, that Domenico character is very interesting. Again, like you said, he imprisoned his family, but he's also very much imprisoned himself through these fears and the haunting of the past after that event happened, and that he had faith in maybe that biblical stuff, but he didn't have the faith in future and humanity and beauty and things like that. So we see through that character this multi-layered um, structure of different types of faith, and how again certain types of faith mislead you, and some of them again can help you progress. But I think again he's a good example of the also the idea of nostalgia and the past. Yeah, just like the main character is, and that's why I think Domenico and the main character are so interconnected as well. That while they are very different people at the same time, they are both haunted by the past and they cannot move forward. Yeah,
Yeah, they're mirrors, right? So they're
yeah,
mirroring one another. And initially, I was just totally drawn into just that aspect, the more literal. Okay, Domenico, the father, he imprisons his children. He doesn't let them out. He believes there's threats everywhere. He believes the world is ending, and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, but fatherland, like, is Domenico also representative of the Soviet Union? Because Soviet Union acted that way as well. It imprisoned all its children, and the world is a threat. It's like the end of history. It's communism versus capitalism. It's now the end of history. Um, in some ways, end of the world, because you have all this Cold War fear of nuclear fallout, all these kinds of things, and you imprison your children to protect them, quote unquote, protect them, or from the evil forces of even capitalism and all these kinds of things. And now we are at that point between in the 83s. It's already clear it's devolving, and there are people even leaving the Soviet Union, like himself. And now it's like you have to understand, try to understand why the father did that, or the fatherland did that, or why those ideas that we believe in, or faith, we had faith in certain things, but they led us wrong. But then you also have to forgive. So I think there's this powerful dialogue where he's saying, I mean, I understand you. I understand why you did what you did. So there's like two layers. One is on a personal level, him forgiving himself. I understand why you did what you did, this regret you have. But you know, it can also be forgiven. You don't need to be haunted by it. You don't need to trap yourself in it. You don't need to be consumed by it for the rest of your world. You can renew, you can regenerate, you can do that. And in another way, it's also him. If it's nostalgia for the homeland, then you have to look at the complexity of the homeland he comes from, and there is some understanding and forgiveness that would be required there. So I thought that's uh, really interesting, and that layer might be there because the writer of the film is also the writer of La Ventura, which also had like similar themes tied to like Italy as a homeland and all that stuff.
Yeah, and of course, this film came out like less than a decade before the Soviet Union collapsed. So it was very close to that already, and it was well after Stalin, for example, and many of the kind of glory days of the Soviet Union when it had like insane economic growth and when it was a big world superpower. Those days started, or at this point, they were kind of in the past for the most part, and America had started to really win the battle. But also, I think there's that political aspect there, but at the same time, just the fact that Tarkovsky really missed his own country, I think he also was probably very disappointed that he had to leave there, not because he wanted to leave there, but because he had to leave there, and he couldn't like express his art fully in the cultural context where he wanted to express his art. So he was like very alienated and distant from his country at that point, but also at the same time very nostalgic, and he had that longing for it.
Yeah, and it's Domenico is also this old and somewhat seeming senile individual as well, where people are seeing him as crazy and all that. And that can also parallel with who the leader was at that time in Soviet Union, because it's like Andropov, and it's like all the leaders of the party, one by one, they were like really old men, like nearing the end of their life, most of them really sick, and they were like leading the country. So that might be an overread, but it is kind of a bit of a parallel there as well. Yeah, yeah,
Well, of course, that craziness kind of relates to art as well. As I
yeah,
think the
yeah, yeah,
craziest people are often the most creative people at the same time. Yeah,
yeah.
they might not be the most functional in kind of these average kind of chores and real life things that you have to do, but then at the same time they can create these different worlds that exist outside of our real world.
Yeah, and there's all this imagery of escape too, because it's like from the beginning of the film too, where the birds, when they open that kind of a what would you say, kind of a mannequin type thing, and then they open it and all the white birds like fly out. So there's that whole captivity and escape imagery constantly in the film uh, as well, and then it parallels with him in Russia, then kind of being captive. He can't express his art. But then by leaving, he can express his art. But by leaving, he doesn't want to leave. He still wants to be home because he loves his homeland, or he loves where he comes from. He doesn't. But there's this complexity with where he comes from, and yeah, it's really beautiful. Um, it's really beautiful. And that last shot is so haunting. I didn't even know what to make of it, but it just resonates with you. That's very rarely have I don't think I've ever seen that really. I can't recall that film ending like that where it's just
And I started thinking
it,
about the water again, that
mm, yeah.
maybe again people are kind of like underwater in the way that
Mm,
you are just captive by the water, and you can never come to the surface and escape your past. And of course the water is kind of like your stream of consciousness,
yeah,
or you
yeah.
cannot you can never escape your mind and your past. There's always the water there. You always try to swim to the surface and move on, but you can never do that. I mean, there's lots of that in Stalker as well, which we will again talk about in July.
Yeah, that you can definitely have that psychoanalysis there too, because the structures being man's ego, it's his ability to kind of create and have power over the world and extract resources and manipulate resources for what they want. But then there's the subconscious, there's the stream of consciousness, the subconscious, the water, the unknown, the depths, the darkness of the unknown below. So that's definitely I can see that as well. I got that feeling as well. It's just what's really amazing though is that while we're talking about those themes, more than analyzing them, to experience the feeling of being in the world of the film is way beyond what we are. It's interesting to talk about analytically, but when you're seeing that scene and they're in that flooded uh, church and they're in the bottom, they're like wading in the water and they're having this conversation, and you know the echo of their voices in this kind of chamber, and the lighting and all just the ambience. It's like that's beyond any. It's like it's like there's analysis, but it transcends that, and it creates an experience that's just you can't explain it. You can't almost put it in words. um and that's why I felt so nervous to talk about this, because I was like, how do you put in words what you're actually experiencing and seeing and feeling?
And one more point, and then we can again sum it up. But I started also psychoanalyzing the ruins and the buildings here, because of course our memories are fragments and they are never the whole
Yeah.
building. They are never the way it actually happened, but they are kind of like a ruins of a building, that some of it is still left, but you never will get the full picture. It's all like it's bit here and there. Yeah, you have this part of the building still left, but then it has been destroyed elsewhere here. So you might remember this and this about your childhood, but then some of it is more fragmentary and some of it is completely gone. But then your longing is kind of like a entire building that you still long for your past, even though it's all fragmented in your brain and you cannot remember it fully. So you always long for your view of the past, even though it's not the real past. So, yeah, there's so many things.
Yes. Yeah, so many things. And yeah, that's a really good point. And that again shows why we talk about these filmmakers being brilliant, because when you don't just go and shoot at a location because it's beautiful, they shoot at a location because, like you said, there are all these representations that stand out by putting that in a frame or showing that in a frame. And that's the brilliance of it all. And yeah, I definitely we can wrap it up, but we could have probably had another maybe 30-minute discussion just discussing that lovely Sisyphusian sequence of him trying to light a candle and carry it across, and basically follow this direction from Domenico to go and do that, with the water all dried up and the flame, and trying to protect the flame before it goes out, and it being Sisyphusian because it seems almost futile, and he has to keep going back and trying to do that again. I mean, that sequence alone has so much that could be discussed just by the about that part alone, and how that ties into the themes of the movie.
And I also started thinking about what this film says about Italy. Because of
Yeah.
course with Italy we really think about the past, like ancient Rome and all these really old buildings and painters and Dante and
Mm.
everything Renaissance. So it's all in the past, just like these characters are clinging to the past. It's all in ruins. There's not much to look forward to, but you can always be proud of the past and cling on to it because it was great. But what will be the future? And again, with the candle and everything, you're trying to protect your road to the future. But
Yeah.
then you can just never escape the past. Like that has been the main theme, probably, that the past is always there haunting you no matter what.
Yeah. And then it reached a state of decadence, especially under like fascism. And it was ironically Russia that participated in taking that apart as well and destroying a lot of that as well in the war. And yeah, my God. So yeah, there's a whole other thing that probably could be thought about, not just about Russia, but then thinking about Italy itself, because he's saying something about Italy, like you're saying, definitely. Yeah. Wow.
But yeah. But what an incredible film, and I think this conversation really added to the experience. I think this conversation went way better than I thought it would, like it always goes. That I was really nervous beforehand because I didn't have many thoughts, but somehow the analysis just keeps building up brick by brick during the conversation. It always comes from some
Yeah.
weird place. I don't know where it comes from, but I guess should always have faith in your own
Yeah.
brain that it will come up with something when it needs to, when you have
Yeah.
a conversation about these films.
Yeah. And I think because it's like you care about it, I care about it. It does move us. So I think it's that thing that something has moved me, and then how will it translate in a conversation? But I guess that's also the thing, that when you talk to someone who is, like you said, like, curious and all that, so we're both mining together, and then as we're mining together, we're like, oh yeah, that's right, that scene. You'll bring something up, and I'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, oh that's right, okay, and then it makes me think of something else, and so I think that's a great symbiosis, as they call it. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
And then there are always more thoughts when we look back at these conversations and
Yeah.
that,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah,
When
I
I
should
like,
have mentioned this and that. Yeah.
yeah, and even when I listen back, I sometimes I get, because obviously we're recording, so there's a self consciousness and everything like that when you're recording. So, or you were hearing it the first time, but often when I'm listening back and the things you're saying, it's like it registers even more deeply, and then I start thinking about other things. I was like, yeah, that's actually such a good point. That I need this and that. So, and there's nothing better to be able to share something like an appreciation for like a film like this, and kind of geek out in discussing it. I think it's just so rewarding. It's so much fun.
And I feel like Tarkovsky as a director just keeps growing and growing in my estimation as I get older, and these films just get better and better the more you watch them. So that's great.
Yeah, yeah,
And Stalker will be a great discussion. So
yeah.
looking
I'm
forward
looking
to
forward
that
to that. So
fairly soon. So.
yeah, Stalker. And then in the future, I also picked up Mirror on your recommendation. So
Yeah. And maybe we'll do the sacrifice as well. Then you,
oh yeah, I have the
yeah,
Sacrifice as well. Yeah, I picked that up as well. Yeah,
oh yeah. Maybe we'll do them all this year. So we'll.
yeah. Who knows?
But anyway, thanks for watching this podcast discussion. It was a great discussion, and then you can look down below and see the schedule for the foreseeable future. You can see it in the description of this video, also as a pinned comment on this video, and then also in my channel page if you want to see it there. But yeah, let us know your thoughts about Nostalgia if you have seen it or if you are interested in watching it, and you can also talk about Tarkovsky in general if you are interested. So thanks for everybody who has commented, and thanks for watching. Yeah, this was a great discussion. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.